The air is thick, tasting of petrichor and a strange metallic tang that you can't quite place until you realize it's the scent of an earth that hasn't yet learned how to grow a flower. You are standing in the heart of the Morrison Formation approximately 150 million years ago, where the ground beneath your boots is a shifting mosaic of alkaline mud and prehistoric dust. To your left, a fern the size of a satellite dish unfurls with a slow, agonizing creak, and the horizon is dominated by moving mountains of flesh that make the heavy humidity feel even heavier. It's a world of monochromatic greens and deep, bruised cycad browns, a place where the concept of quiet is interrupted by the distant rhythmic thud of several dozen tons of sauropod looking for breakfast. Now, I should probably mention that between the carbon dioxide levels and the local predators, you probably won't survive this journey for more than 20 minutes, but at least the view is spectacular. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. Drop your location and your local time in the comments so I can imagine where this story's traveling. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a tentative step forward, the mud of the Jurassic West clinging to your soles like wet concrete. This isn't the lush, tropical jungle Hollywood promised you. It's more of a vast, semi-arid floodplain crisscrossed by lazy, meandering rivers that seem to forget where they're going. Ahead of you, the haze begins to shimmer and break apart, revealing the first of the titans, a herd of Diplodocus carnegie. They move with a surprisingly fluid grace, their whip-like tails trailing behind them for nearly 40 feet, occasionally cracking against the ground with a sound like a gunshot. You find yourself squinting through the dust, trying to reconcile the sheer scale of these animals with the laws of physics. It's a mainstream historical fact that Diplodocus is one of the longest dinosaurs ever discovered, stretching out to nearly 80 feet from snout to tail tip. Yet as you watch them, they seem almost delicate in their movements, like giant, long-necked swans navigating a very muddy pond. You notice a smaller one, well, small being a relative term for something the size of a city bus, pausing to strip the bark off a ginkgo tree. It looks at you with a large, glassy eye, its pupils horizontal like a goat's, and for a second you feel a kinship that is immediately erased when it sneezes, coating you in a gallon of prehistoric mucus. It's a charming start to your expedition. You wipe your sleeve and keep walking, noticing how the ground is pockmarked with sauropod potholes, deep, water-filled depressions left by their massive, pillar-like limbs. Historians still argue whether these giants travelled in organised family units or were more like wandering in different clouds of biological mass that just happened to be heading the same direction. There's something peaceful about it, though. The way the light filters through the dust, catching the scales on their flanks, makes the whole world feel like a slow-motion dream. As you wander deeper into this floodplain, you stumble upon a curious sight, a pile of polished, rounded stones lying in the middle of a clearing where no river flows. These are gastroliths, stomach stones. These massive herbivores would swallow rocks to help grind up the tough, fibrous conifers in their muscular gizzards because, frankly, their teeth were about as effective for chewing as a set of plastic forks. Here's a fringe tidbit for you to ponder as you drift off. Some paleontologists have suggested that sauropods might have been ecosystem engineers in a much more literal sense, perhaps even clearing entire forests, not just by eating them, but by the sheer weight of their migration paths, effectively creating their own highways through the Mesozoic. It's a bit like imagining a fleet of organic bulldozers that occasionally stops to poop out a small hill. The sun is a pale, bloated disk in the sky, filtered through volcanic ash from the rising mountains to the west. You feel the heat radiating off the ground, but the breeze is cool, carrying the scent of rotting vegetation and ancient water. You find yourself leaning against the trunk of a fossilized log, or what will be one in 100 million years, and watching the horizon. The Diplodocus herd is moving on, their long necks swaying like masts of ships on a heavy sea. You realize that out here, time doesn't move in minutes, it moves in heartbeats and migrations. You're just a ghost in their world, a soft-bodied anomaly in a land of scales and armor. You start to notice the smaller details now that the initial shock of seeing a living skyscraper has worn off. There are dragonflies with wingspans like hawks darting over the mud pools, and the sound of the wind through the horsetails is a dry, whispering hiss. It's a lonely landscape in many ways, vast and indifferent to your presence. You find yourself wondering how many millions of these creatures lived, breathed, and died right where you're standing, their entire lives reduced to a few mineralized fragments in a museum basement. It's a humbling thought, the kind that makes your own worries feel as small as the pebbles in a sauropod's belly. The mud under your feet is drying now, cracking into hexagonal patterns that look like a giant's skin. You follow the path of the herd, your eyes fixed on the way their tails twitch, a constant, rhythmic movement that seems to keep time with the earth itself. You're moving toward a denser thicket of conifers, where the shadows are longer and the air feels a bit more secretive. You know there are larger things than Diplodocus waiting in the deeper parts of the Morrison, creatures with more vertical ambitions. But for now, you just walk, letting the heavy, prehistoric air fill your lungs, feeling the slow, steady pulse of a world that was old, long before humans ever dreamed of naming it. The silence here isn't empty. It's full of the sound of growing things and the distant, low-frequency rumbles of the sauropods communicating in a register you can feel in your chest more than you can hear in your ears. It's a soothing vibration, a deep tissue massage for the soul. You close your eyes for a moment, letting that subsonic hum wash over you, and for a second, you aren't a tourist in time anymore. You're just another part of the Jurassic, a tiny speck of life under an enormous, ash-streaked sky, drifting through the mud and the ferns toward the next great mystery. As you leave the slender, whip-tailed Diplodocus behind, the ground begins to vibrate with a much more deliberate, authoritative thud. The transition from the floodplain to the edge of a conifer forest is marked by a sudden change in light. The sun is now filtered through a canopy of Araucaria needles that sit 100 feet above your head. You find yourself craning your neck so far back it actually hurts, squinting into the glare to see the source of a shadow that has effectively turned noon into twilight. This is the Brachiosaurus altithorax, a creature that doesn't just inhabit the landscape, it defines it. While most other sauropods of the Morrison Formation are built like suspension bridges, long and low, the Brachiosaurus is a biological skyscraper, its front legs longer than its hind ones, giving it a permanent upward tilt that looks like it's constantly trying to eavesdrop on the clouds. It is a mainstream historical fact that Brachiosaurus was one of the rarest giants in this ecosystem, far outnumbered by its cousin Apatosaurus, yet its sheer verticality made it the undisputed king of the high canopy buffet. You walk toward one of its forelimbs, which is essentially a scaly, grey tree trunk the size of a redwood. You could probably wrap your arms around it and not even cover a quarter of its circumference. There's a strange clicking sound coming from somewhere above you, the sound of 10-inch-long chisel-shaped teeth stripping tough needles off a branch. You stand there, a tiny, soft-bodied speck in the shadow of a 50-ton breathing monument, and you realize that if this thing decides to shift its weight by even an inch, you'll become a permanent part of the Jurassic stratigraphy. It's a terrifyingly beautiful realization. The animal exhales in a gust of warm, humid air, smelling faintly of fermented pine and ancient gut bacteria, nearly knocks you over. You wipe the dinosaur breath off your face and notice the way its skin moves. It isn't smooth like a lizard's, but a complex topography of cracked, pebbly scales, scarred by years of pushing through thorny brush. Historians still argue whether Brachiosaurus was truly warm-blooded, possessing a heart powerful enough to pump blood up that incredibly long neck against the crushing force of gravity, or if it relied on some form of physiological siphon effect to keep its brain oxygenated. Watching it now, the sheer effort of its existence seems like a miracle of engineering. It moves its head in a slow, sweeping arc, its nostrils perched high on a bony crest atop its skull, sniffing the upper atmosphere for signs of rain, or perhaps the scent of a distant mate. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit for you to chew on while you watch this behemoth eat. Some researchers have toyed with the idea that these massive sauropods might have possessed a second brain or a massive nerve bundle at the base of their spine to help coordinate their back half. While it's mostly been debunked as a literal brain, the idea of a creature so large it needs a regional manager for its tail is just the kind of delightful absurdity the Jurassic excels at. You reach out, your fingers hovering just an inch from the rough, sun-warmed scales of its flank. You don't touch it, of course, that would be rude and potentially lethal, but you can feel the heat radiating from its body, a massive thermal engine processing hundreds of pounds of low-quality forage every single hour. You decide to sit down for a moment, leaning against a fallen log that is already half buried in the soft, loamy soil. From this low vantage point, the Brachiosaurus looks even more impossible. Its tail, shorter and thicker than that of the Diplodocus, hangs like a heavy counterweight. You watch a small lizard scurry across the giant's foot, completely ignored. It's a reminder that in this world, scale is everything. To the lizard, the Brachiosaurus is just a moving mountain. To the Brachiosaurus, you are probably no more significant than a particularly loud beetle. There's a certain peace in that insignificance. You're not on the menu mainly because you're not a conifer branch and you're far too small to be worth the effort of a predator's chase. The forest around you is alive with a low-frequency groan, the sound of wood being stressed by the movements of the giants. Every few minutes, a branch the size of a telephone pole snaps and crashes to the forest floor, discarded by the Brachiosaurus once the choice needles have been stripped. You find yourself entering a sort of trance, timed to the slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction of the Titan's ribcage. It's like watching the earth itself breathe. The light continues to shift, casting long, striped shadows across the ferns, and for a moment the world feels perfectly still, held in a delicate balance between the massive and the minuscule. You notice how the Brachiosaurus uses its neck not just for feeding, but as a sort of periscope, surveying the surrounding plains for any sign of movement. Its height gives it a tactical advantage that no other animal in the Morrison can match. It sees the weather coming hours before it arrives. It sees the dust clouds of migrating herds on the horizon. It is the silent sentinel of the Jurassic, a creature that lives in a different time zone than the rest of us. You find yourself yawning, the rhythmic chewing and the heavy, warm air acting like a sedative. You know you should keep moving. There are more secrets to find in the undergrowth, but the safety of this giant's shadow is tempting. As the Brachiosaurus finally takes a thunderous step forward, moving deeper into the grove, the sun hits your face again, blindingly bright. The sudden warmth is a nudge to keep going. You stand up, brushing the Jurassic needles off your clothes, and look at the massive footprint left behind. It's deep enough to serve as a bathtub, already beginning to fill with seeping groundwater. You follow the path it cleared through the brush, grateful for the highway it's provided. The giants are the architects of this world, and you're just a guest, walking through their halls, trying to keep your footsteps as quiet as possible in a land where even a heartbeat feels like a drum. The heavy, rhythmic thud of the Brachiosaur fades into a low vibration in your heels as you step out of the deep forest shadows and into a sun-drenched clearing dominated by low-lying ferns and cycads. Here, the architecture of life shifts from vertical towers to horizontal fortresses. You find yourself standing downwind of a creature that looks less like an animal and more like a medieval siege engine designed by a surrealist. This is Stegosaurus armatus, and even from 30 feet away, the sight of those alternating pentagonal plates rising from its spine is enough to make you catch your breath. They catch the Jurassic sun glowing with a dull, earthy red that suggests a complex network of blood vessels just beneath the keratin. You watch as the animal swings its heavy head near the ground, its toothless beak snipping through tough horsetails with a methodical clipping sound. Snip, crunch, snip, crunch. It is a mainstream historical fact that Stegosaurus possessed one of the smallest brain-to-body ratios of any dinosaur, with a central nervous system roughly the size and shape of a bent hot dog. Looking at its tiny, narrow head compared to its multi-ton hindquarters, you can't help but feel a twinge of pity. It's the ultimate no thoughts, head empty protagonist of the Mesozoic. But don't let the vacant expression fool you. As you edge slightly closer, the animal's tail, the thagomizer, twitches. 4 3-foot-long bony spikes, horizontal and wicked, sweep through the air just inches above the ferns. One wrong step, and you'd be neatly skewered like a cocktail olive. It's a silent, deadly reminder that in the Jurassic, being slow or dim-witted doesn't mean being defenseless. You give the tail a very wide berth, remembering that even the mighty Allosaurus shows up in the fossil record with punctured vertebrae that match these exact spikes. Historians still argue whether those magnificent backplates were used for temperature regulation, acting as prehistoric solar panels and radiators, or if they were purely for a flamboyant look-at-me display to attract mates and intimidate rivals. Perhaps it was both, a multifunctional Swiss Army knife of bone. You watch as the Stegosaurus shifts its position, and for a moment the plates seem to flush a deeper shade of crimson. It's a mesmerizing sight, a living mood ring the size of a moving van. You find yourself wondering if it's reacting to your presence or just catching a particularly warm breeze. The air here is drier than in the conifer groves, smelling of crushed greenery and the musky, reptilian scent of sun-warmed scales. It's a peaceful scene, provided you stay out of the swing zone. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit that might keep you awake if the thagomizer doesn't. Some early paleontologists were so baffled by the Stegosaurus's tiny head that they seriously proposed the animal must have had a second brain located in a cavity near its hips to control its hind legs and tail. While we now know that was likely just a storage space for glycogen, a sort of sugar battery for the nervous system, it's much more fun to imagine this creature as a tandem bicycle operated by two very confused, very small pilots. You sit down on a sun-baked rock, watching the animal's slow, deliberate progress. It doesn't seem to have a care in the world, living its life one mouthful of fern at a time, blissfully unaware that it will one day be the star of every third grader's lunchbox. The way the Stegosaurus moves is peculiar. Its front legs are significantly shorter than its back legs, giving it a perpetually hunched-over posture, as if it's constantly looking for a lost contact lens in the dirt. This low-slung build makes it the perfect lawnmower for the Jurassic understory. You watch a small, furry mammal, one of your own distant ancestors no doubt, scurry out from beneath a fern just as the Stegosaurus's massive foot comes down. The mammal vanishes into a hole and the dinosaur doesn't even blink. There is a profound indifference to this world that is oddly comforting. The big things eat the plants, the small things hide in the dirt, and the sun continues to bake the Morrison mud into stone. You notice that the plates on its back aren't actually attached to its skeleton. They're embedded in the skin like giant, bony scutes. They wobble slightly as the animal walks, a heavy, rhythmic jiggle that adds to its strange, prehistoric charm. You find yourself getting a bit sleepy, lulled by the repetitive snip crunch of its feeding and the heat shimmering off the clearing. The Jurassic isn't always a high-speed chase. More often than not, it's just a long, slow afternoon of digestion. You lean back against your rock, keeping one eye on that lethal tail, and let the sounds of the clearing wash over you. The wind whistles through the gaps in the dinosaur's plates, creating a low, eerie, flute-like sound that blends perfectly with the soft rustle of the palms. As the Stegosaurus moves further into the clearing, it leaves behind a path of flattened vegetation and deep, three-toed prints that will soon harden in the sun. You realize that you've survived your first encounter with an armed herbivore, which is a significant achievement in this neighborhood. You stand up, feeling the stiffness in your own joints, and prepare to move toward the tree line where the ferns grow thicker. You know that where there are slow-moving lunchboxes like the Stegosaurus, there are bound to be things with much sharper teeth watching from the shadows. But for a few more minutes you linger in the warmth, watching the sun glint off those magnificent red plates as the fortress of bone wanders slowly toward the horizon. The peace of the Stegosaurus clearing evaporates the moment you step into the dappled light of the gymnosperm grove. There's a sudden, sharp silence that feels heavy, as if the local insects have collectively decided to hold their breath. You freeze, your back pressed against the rough, corky bark of a giant cycad. 20 yards ahead, a shadow detaches itself from the ferns. It doesn't lumber like the sauropods or trudge like the armored tanks, it flows. This is Allosaurus fragilis, the different lizard and the undisputed lion of the Jurassic Americas. Standing nearly 15 feet tall, its body is a masterpiece of predatory engineering, lean, muscular, and balanced on powerful hind legs that end in talons currently kneading the soft Morrison mud. It is a mainstream historical fact that Allosaurus was the most common large carnivore of its time, outnumbering other predators like Ceratosaurus by a wide margin, which suggests it was a highly successful generalist. You watch as it lowers its head, sniffing a patch of flattened ferns where a young Dryosaurus must have rested an hour ago. Its skull is remarkably light, filled with large openings called fenestrae that reduce weight without sacrificing strength. You notice the two low, rugose horns above its eyes glowing a faint, angry orange in the afternoon sun. They aren't for goring, they're for show, a signal to other lions that this particular hunter is in its prime and looking for trouble. You, being roughly the size of a light snack, are currently beneath its notice, but that doesn't stop your heart from hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. The Allosaurus moves with a bird-like twitchiness, its long, stiff tail acting as a counterbalance as it pivots. Historians still argue whether this predator killed its prey with a powerful bite or used its skull like a hatchet, driving its upper jaw down into a victim's flesh to cause massive blood loss. Watching the way its neck muscles ripple, you suspect it's more than capable of both. It lets out a sound, not the cinematic roar you might expect, but a low, guttural hiss that vibrates through the soles of your boots. It's the sound of a pressurized steam engine venting, a warning to anything in the tall grass that the king is making its rounds. You stay perfectly still, trying to blend into the tree trunk, remembering that their vision is likely movement-based. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit for your sleepy brain to process. Some paleontologists have examined the high rate of healed fractures in Allosaurus bones and suggested these animals were surprisingly resilient, surviving injuries that would have killed a modern mammal. There's even a fringe theory that they might have engaged in social brooding, where injured members were tolerated or even fed by a loose pack. Imagine, if you will, a group of these apex killers sharing a meal like a dysfunctional family at a holiday dinner, albeit with more snarling and significantly more raw meat. It's a strangely domestic image for a creature that looks like a nightmare, rendered in scales. The hunter moves closer to your hiding spot and you get a clear look at its hands. Unlike the tiny, two-fingered vestigial limbs of the later T-Rex, the Allosaurus has 3 powerful fingers tipped with curved, black claws. It uses them to rake through the brush, looking for smaller prey. You can see the scars on its snout, deep, white lines that tell stories of past battles with thagomizers and rival males. It's a hard life in the Morrison, and this individual has clearly paid its dues. The smell of the predator reaches you now. It's not just the musk of a reptile, but the copper tang of old blood and the sour stench of a carnivore's breath. It's an ancient, primal smell that triggers every run instinct you possess, yet you remain rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the lethal elegance of its gait. You watch as it pauses, one foot held mid-air, its head tilting to track the sound of a distant Camptosaurus alarm call. The Allosaurus doesn't run. It begins a high-speed trot, its body leveling out until it looks like a feathered arrow, though feathered is still a point of heated debate in these parts. Within seconds, it has vanished into the thicket, leaving behind nothing but the smell of ozone and the heavy silence of the forest. Your knees finally give way and you slide down the trunk of the cycad, your breath coming in ragged gasps. You've just watched the apex of Jurassic evolution go about its daily business, and you are still in one piece. The forest slowly begins to wake up again. A lizard crawls back onto a sun-warmed rock, and the distant hum of the sauropods returns to fill the void. You realize that the lion of the Jurassic isn't a monster. It's a vital part of the machinery of this world, the force that keeps the herds moving and the weak from overpopulating the floodplains. It's a brutal balance, but a balance nonetheless. You take a moment to steady your hands, leaning your head back against the tree. The danger hasn't passed, it never really does here, but the immediate threat has moved on to find a larger, meatier target. As you sit there, you notice a single shed tooth lying in the mud near your boot. It's serrated like a steak knife, curved and translucent at the edges. You don't pick it up, leave no trace after all, but you stare at it for a long time. It's a tiny fragment of a much larger story, a physical reminder of the razor-thin line between the hunter and the hunted. You feel a strange sense of gratitude to the Allosaurus for letting you witness its power without ending your journey prematurely. The Jurassic is a harsh teacher, but the lessons are unforgettable. You stand up, brush the dust off your knees, and look toward the dense conifers. The day is far from over, and you suspect that if the lions are out, the banquet is just beginning. The adrenaline from your encounter with the Allosaurus begins to recede, leaving a hollow, shaky sensation in your limbs. You decide to find a safe clearing, a place where the visibility is high and the grass is low, to simply sit and observe the engine that powers these massive lives. You settle into a patch of soft moss at the base of a giant horsetail, looking out over a wide, sun-bathed meadow. To your left, a subadult Apatosaurus is methodically dismantling a stand of cycads. This is the Jurassic banquet, a never-ending buffet of tough, fibrous, and often toxic greenery. In this world, eating isn't just a pastime, it is a full-time job. To maintain a body weight that rivals a small naval vessel, these animals must process hundreds of pounds of low-energy fodder every single day. It's a bit like trying to run a freight train on a diet of lawn clippings and celery. It is a mainstream historical fact that the flora of the late Jurassic was dominated by gymnosperms, conifers, ginkgos and cycads, as flowering plants, or angiosperms, had not yet evolved to brighten the landscape with petals or offer the easy energy of fruit. You watch the Apatosaurus wrap its muscular, prehensile tongue around a cluster of fern fronds and rip them clean from the stalk. There is no chewing involved. The dinosaur simply gulps the mass down its long, vacuum hose neck. You can actually see the bolus of food travelling down its throat in a series of rhythmic ripples. It's a marvel of efficiency, though the dining etiquette leaves much to be desired. The air here is thick with the smell of crushed sap and the sweet, cloying aroma of fermenting vegetation, a scent that reminds you of a compost bin left out in the summer sun. Historians still argue whether the massive necks of these sauropods were primarily used to reach high into the canopy like biological cranes, or if they were more like giant vacuum cleaners, allowing the animals to sweep a wide arc of ground-level ferns without moving their massive bodies. Watching the animal in front of you, it seems to be doing a bit of both, pivoting its head with a lazy, mechanical precision. It's a low-energy lifestyle that requires a very high-volume gut. You find yourself staring at the animal's midsection, which is so vast it looks like a geological feature. Somewhere inside that leathery cavern, a specialized microbial community is working overtime to break down cellulose that would be indigestible to almost any modern mammal. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit to mull over as you watch the lawnmower at work. Some researchers have calculated that the sheer amount of methane produced by a herd of these giant sauropods might have been enough to actually influence the global climate of the Jurassic. Imagine a world where the weather patterns are dictated by the digestive tracts of a few thousand hungry dinosaurs. It's a literal butterfly effect if the butterfly weighed 30 tons and had a very gassy stomach. You chuckle softly to yourself, the sound muffled by the soft rustle of the wind. It's hard to feel intimidated by a creature that is, essentially, a giant walking greenhouse. You shift your weight, feeling the dampness of the moss seeping through your clothes. In the distance, a group of Camptosaurus, stout, bipedal herbivores, are grazing on the periphery of the sauropods' path. They act like the clean-up crew, picking through the scraps and overturned soil left behind by the giants. This ecosystem is a finely tuned machine where nothing goes to waste. Even the massive piles of dung dropped by the Apatosaurus, each the size of a beanbag chair, are immediately swarmed by prehistoric beetles and insects. It's the circle of life, though in the Jurassic, that circle is particularly large and quite messy. You find yourself thinking about that crocodile dung sunscreen you heard about, compared to the sheer volume of waste here. A little sun protection seems positively hygienic. The sun is beginning to dip lower, casting a golden, honey-like glow over the meadow. The colours of the Jurassic are subtle: deep olives, rusty oranges, and the slate grey of the dinosaur's skin. It's a palette that feels ancient and permanent. You watch a small winged insect land on a fern near your hand. It looks remarkably like a modern lacewing, a tiny survivor in a world of giants. It's a reminder that while the titans grab all the headlines, the small things are the ones that truly endure. You find your eyes growing heavy, lulled by the repetitive, rhythmic sound of the Apatosaurus stripping leaves. Zip, gulp, zip, gulp. It's a prehistoric metronome, marking time in a world that has no clocks. You realize that this banquet is what makes everything else possible. Without this endless sea of green, there would be no Allosaurus in the shadows, no Stegosaurus in the clearings, and no footprints for future humans to find in the sandstone. The plants are the silent partners in this grand drama. You reach out and touch a fern frond, feeling its leathery, plastic-like texture. It's tough, built to survive the grazing of giants and the heat of a greenhouse world. It feels alien, yet familiar, a direct link to the deep past. You take a deep breath, the air tasting of pine needles and ancient soil, and let yourself sink a little deeper into the moss. The Apatosaurus finally moves on, its massive tail dragging a shallow groove through the mud as it seeks out a fresh stand of conifers. The clearing feels empty without its presence, though the crushed plants and deep footprints remain as a testament to its passing. You stand up, stretching your back, and look toward the setting sun. The Jurassic day is winding down, but the story of the Morrison is just beginning to unfold. You know that tomorrow will bring new giants and new dangers, but for now, you are content to have been a guest at the greatest banquet the world has ever known. You turn away from the meadow, heading toward the lengthening shadows of the western ridges where the history of these bones first began to be unearthed by human hands. Leaving behind the rhythmic crunch of the sauropod banquet, you find your surroundings shifting. The ferns and mud of the Jurassic begin to blur, replaced by the jagged, sun-bleached horizons of late 19th century Wyoming and Colorado. You are no longer just a ghost in the deep past. You are a witness to the chaotic birth of American paleontology. The air here is dry and tastes of alkaline dust and cheap tobacco. In the distance, the silhouettes of men in waistcoats and felt hats scramble over rocky ridges, swinging pickaxes with a desperation that borders on madness. This is the era of the Bone Wars, a period of scientific discovery fueled by a level of petty spite that would make a modern reality TV star blush. You find yourself standing near a quarry where two legendary figures, Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope, are engaged in a multi-decade game of one-upmanship that redefined our understanding of the Jurassic Americas. It is a mainstream historical fact that the rivalry between Marsh and Cope led to the discovery and naming of over 130 species of dinosaurs, including many of the icons you've just encountered, like Stegosaurus and Allosaurus. However, their haste to beat one another often resulted in scientific carnage. You watch a group of hired labourers under Marsh's payroll frantically crate a massive femur, whispering about how they've been ordered to smash any leftover bones to ensure Cope's team doesn't find them. It was a scorched earth policy applied to natural history. You lean against a stack of wooden crates, watching the dust clouds from a distant wagon train. The tension in the air is palpable. It's not just a search for knowledge, but a quest for immortal fame. And the Morrison Formation is the ultimate prize. Historians still argue whether the sheer toxicity of the Marsh-Cope rivalry actually hindered paleontology more than it helped, as their rushed descriptions led to a taxonomic nightmare that took nearly a century to untangle. For decades, the world believed Brontosaurus and Apatosaurus were two entirely different animals simply because Marsh was in such a hurry to name a new thunder lizard that he accidentally put a Camarasaurus head on an Apatosaurus body. It's the paleontological equivalent of putting a cat's head on a dog and insisting it's a new species of tiger. You can't help but smile at the absurdity of it all, two of the most brilliant minds of their generation acting like toddlers fighting over a very old, very heavy toy box. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit from the front lines of the Bone Wars. The rivalry became so intense that Cope actually kept the skull of a famous fossil under his bed for years, terrified that Marsh's spies would steal it in the middle of the night. There are even rumours of fossil espionage, where team members would switch sides or leak false coordinates to lead the opposition into barren canyons. You look at the rugged, unforgiving landscape of the American West and realize that these men weren't just scientists. They were frontiersmen dealing with hostile terrain, limited water, and the constant threat of having their funding pulled by a fickle government. It makes the discovery of a Diplodocus feel less like a clinical extraction and more like a heist. The sun beats down on the quarry and you watch a young fossil hunter carefully brush sand away from a vertebrae. He looks exhausted, his skin tanned to the colour of old leather. You realise that while the big names got the credit, it was people like this, the uncredited labourers and local ranchers, who did the back-breaking work of pulling these giants out of the stone. You find a seat on a discarded shovel handle, watching the process. It's slow, tedious, and incredibly fragile work. One wrong strike of the hammer and a 150-million-year-old secret shatters into 1,000 pieces. It's a high-stakes game of operation played with a sledgehammer. You find yourself thinking about the crocodile dung sunscreen mentioned by travellers in other times. Out here in the 1870s, you'd probably settle for a thick layer of prairie dust and a wide-brimmed hat. The scent of the camp reaches you. Salt pork, wood smoke, and the sharp tang of blasting powder. The Bone Wars weren't just fought with brushes, they used dynamite to blast through the stubborn sandstone of the Morrison. It's a miracle anything survived at all. You watch as a massive block of stone encased in plaster and burlap is winched onto a wagon. That block might contain the next greatest find, or it might just be another pile of fragments that will end up in a museum basement, forgotten for 50 years. The shadows of the ridges lengthen and the frantic energy of the quarry begins to settle. The labourers gather around a small fire, their voices low and weary. You stay on the periphery, a silent observer of the bridge between the prehistoric and the modern. It was this bitter, ego-driven conflict that gave the world the Jurassic we know today. Without Marsh and Cope's mutual hatred, these animals might still be sleeping undisturbed beneath the sagebrush. Their flaws were as massive as the sauropods they hunted, but their impact on our collective imagination is undeniable. You look up at the stars, which seem much brighter in the thin mountain air, and wonder what those two old rivals would think if they knew their names were now inextricably linked to the very monsters they tried to claim as their own. As the fire dies down to embers, you feel the pull of the Morrison once again. The 19th century fades, the wagons and crates dissolving back into the red dust of the Utah desert. You are moving back into the deep time, but you carry the legacy of the bone wars with you. You've seen the bones in the ground and the men who dug them up. Now it's time to find the creatures that even Marsh and Cope found baffling. The night is coming on, and in the Jurassic, the night belongs to things with strange shapes and even stranger habits. You stand up, shaking the 1870s dust from your jacket, and prepare to meet the horn-headed enigma of the desert dust of the 1870s settles. And as the air cools, the dry sagebrush of the bone walls morphs back into the lush, prehistoric wetlands of the Morrison. You are standing on the muddy bank of a wide, sluggish river, where the water is the color of weak tea and thick with the smell of rotting water lilies. A low, rhythmic huffing sound draws your attention to a stand of ginkgo trees. Emerging from the ferns is a predator that looks like a rough draft of the Allosaurus you met earlier, yet it possesses a flair for the dramatic that its more common cousin lacks. This is Ceratosaurus nasicornis, a medium-sized carnivore with a distinctive, blunted horn rising from its snout and a row of bony osteoderms running down its spine like a serrated ridge. It looks less like a sleek modern bird and more like a dragon pulled from an ancient tapestry. It is a mainstream historical fact that Ceratosaurus coexisted with the much larger Allosaurus, leading to one of the most famous examples of niche partitioning in the fossil record. While the lion of the Jurassic likely dominated the open floodplains, this horn-nosed specialist seems to have preferred the tangled riverbanks and denser forests. You watch it now as it lowers its head to drink, its golden eyes scanning the surface of the water for more than just a reflection. Its teeth are disproportionately large for its skull, long, blade-like daggers that hang down past its lower jaw, giving it a permanent, sinister overbite. You find yourself wondering if it ever accidentally bites its own lip, a thought that would be a lot funnier if the creature weren't currently looking in your direction with predatory curiosity. Historians still argue whether the prominent nasal horn of Ceratosaurus was a functional weapon for intra-specific combat, essentially prehistoric headbutting, or if it was a purely ornamental structure used for sexual display. Given that the bone of the horn is relatively thin and honeycombed with air pockets, the combat theory has lost some ground to the idea that these horns were brightly coloured, perhaps flushing with blood during the mating season to signal health and vigour. Imagine a male Ceratosaurus with a vibrant crimson-coloured horn strutting through the ferns like a very dangerous tropical bird. It's a far cry from the drab, grey monsters of early cinema, and it makes the creature feel oddly more real, more grounded in the messy, colourful reality of biology. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit to keep you company in the river mist. Some paleontologists, noting the unusually flexible tail and the wear patterns on its teeth, have suggested that Ceratosaurus might have been a semi-aquatic specialist, the crocodile of the dinosaur world. The idea is that it lurked in the shallows, using that powerful, deep tail to propel itself after lungfish or large turtles. While it's still a fringe theory, watching the way it expertly navigates the slippery mud of the bank, you can almost see it. It moves with a certain heavy-bottomed stability that the more athletic Allosaurus lacks. You shift your weight, your boots squelching in the muck, and the predator's head snaps toward you, its nostrils flaring as it samples your scent. A strange, synthetic, human aroma that doesn't fit into its mental encyclopedia of things that taste like chicken. You decide that now would be an excellent time to practice the ancient art of being very, very still. The Ceratosaurus tilts its head, the horns above its eyes casting long shadows across its face. It's a moment of pure cross-species tension. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen mentioned by the explorers of the 19th century? You'd give anything for a bit of scent masking right now, even if it meant smelling like a swamp. Fortunately, a large lungfish chooses that exact moment to splash in the shallows 20 feet away. The Ceratosaurus loses interest in you instantly, spinning with a surprising, serpentine agility and lunging into the water. The speed is terrifying. It's a blur of scales and teeth, followed by a wet, crunching sound that tells you the lungfish's day has taken a permanent turn for the worse. As the predator drags its prize back into the deep shadows of the brush, you take the opportunity to back away, your heart rate slowly returning to something approaching a normal rhythm. The riverbank is a dangerous place, a borderland where the land and water ecosystems collide in a bloody mess. You find a slightly higher, drier ridge overlooking the water and sit down, watching the dragon-like silhouette disappear. The Morrison isn't just a world of giants, it's a world of specialists, each carved out by millions of years of competition and environmental pressure. The Ceratosaurus is a reminder that even in the shadow of giants like Brachiosaurus, there is plenty of room for a weird, horn-nosed underdog to make a very successful living. The light over the river begins to turn a bruised purple as the sun sets. You notice how the insects here, giant dragonflies and beetles, seem to congregate near the water, their wings buzzing with a low-frequency hum that sounds like a distant electrical transformer. The air is cooling rapidly now, the moisture from the river creating a thin, waist-high fog that makes the ferns look like they're floating. It's an ethereal, beautiful sight, provided you don't think too hard about what might be moving through that fog. You wrap your arms around your knees, feeling the chill of the Jurassic evening. The day's heat is being sucked away by the clear sky, leaving behind a world of shadows and half-seen shapes. You find yourself thinking about the bone wars again, and how Marsh and Cope must have felt when they first saw the skull of a Ceratosaurus. To them, it must have looked like proof of mythology, a literal dragon pulled from the American West. They fought over its bones with the same intensity the animal uses to fight for its territory. There's a strange continuity in that, the aggression of the past echoing in the aggression of the men who discovered it. But as the fog thickens, those human conflicts feel very far away. Here by the river there is only the sound of the water, the rustle of the ginkgos, and the occasional distant splash of a hunter in the dark. You close your eyes for just a second, letting the damp, ancient air settle over you like a heavy blanket. As the heavy, primeval fog of the riverbank clings to your skin, you decide to move toward the higher, drier ground of the scrublands. The transition is marked by a thinning of the towering conifers and the appearance of low, resilient ferns that can handle the Morrison's seasonal droughts. Here, the ground isn't dominated by multi-ton giants, but by the commuters of the Jurassic. You find yourself standing in a clearing where a group of Dinosaurs, small bipedal ornithopods, are darting through the undergrowth with the frantic, jerky energy of modern deer. They are the antithesis of the slow, deliberate sauropods you've spent the day observing. With their large liquid eyes and slender, bird-like legs, they represent a different side of the Jurassic Americas, the survival of the swiftest. It is a mainstream historical fact that Dinosaurs was a widespread and successful herbivore lacking any form of armor or weaponry, which meant its primary defense was a world-class set of lungs and a very high top speed. You watch as a juvenile Dinosaurus pauses to nibble on a low-hanging ginkgo leaf, its head constantly twitching to monitor the horizon. It is built for a quick getaway, its stiff tail acting as a literal rudder for high-speed cornering. You can't help but notice how modern they look compared to the dragon-like Ceratosaurus. If you squint, they could almost be strangely proportioned ostriches. They are the background characters of the Morrison, the prey base that keeps the entire ecosystem from collapsing, yet there is a quiet dignity in their constant caffeinated vigilance. Historians still argue whether these smaller dinosaurs were truly social animals that lived in organized herds for protection, or if they were merely aggregations of individuals drawn to the same food source, like pigeons in a park. Watching them now, there's a definite sense of communication. When one Dinosaurus lets out a sharp, bird-like chirp, the entire group freezes instantly, heads up, eyes wide. It's a collective nervous system spread across a dozen bodies. You stay low to the ground, trying not to be the thing that triggers their flight response. The air here is cleaner than by the river, smelling of sun-dried grass and the dusty, peppery scent of crushed ferns. It's a lighter, more breathable atmosphere that makes you feel a bit more alert yourself. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit for your sleepy mind. Some researchers have looked at the fossilized burrows found in similar formations and suggested that small ornithopods like Dinosaurus, or their close relatives, might have been diggers, potentially spending the hottest parts of the day underground to regulate their temperature. Imagine a Jurassic hillside pockmarked with dinosaur-sized rabbit holes, where a 5-ton Allosaurus might accidentally trip over a hidden tunnel. It's a delightful image that turns the monster narrative of the Jurassic on its head, suggesting a world of subterranean hideouts and prehistoric basement apartments. You look at the soft, sandy soil near a cluster of rocks and wonder if there's a family of dinosaurs sleeping just a few feet beneath your boots. You shift your position and your foot snaps a dry twig with a sound like a pistol shot. In an instant, the clearing is empty. The Dinosaurs don't just run, they vanish. They move with a blurring speed that leaves your eyes struggling to keep up, their tails held out straight behind them for balance. One moment they were there, methodically clipping ferns, and the next, there is only the swaying of the grass. You are left alone in the sudden silence, feeling a bit like a clumsy giant. It's a reminder that in the Jurassic, sound is a weapon, and silence is the best armor a small animal can wear. You find a comfortable spot to sit, leaning against a weathered boulder that feels surprisingly warm against your back. From this vantage point, you can see the underfoot scavengers, the tiny mammals and lizards that inhabit the cracks and crevices of the Morrison. They are the true ghosts of this world, rarely seen but always present. You watch a small, shrew-like mammal perhaps a docodon, scurry out from under your boulder to investigate a discarded seed pod. It's covered in soft fur and moves with a frantic, high-speed metabolism that seems out of place in a world of cold-blooded, or at least lukewarm-blooded, reptiles. These are your kin, the tiny survivors who are biding their time while the dinosaurs take up all the space. You feel a strange sense of pride watching it. It's a tiny, furry middle finger to the giants of the age. The sun is low enough now that the shadows of the boulders are stretching out like long, dark fingers across the scrub. You find yourself thinking about the crocodile dung sunscreen again. It wouldn't just protect you from the sun, but in a world of high-speed predators and hyper-vigilant prey, a strong scent might be the only thing that keeps you from being stepped on or eaten. The Jurassic is a sensory overload, a place where every smell and sound has a life or death meaning. You close your eyes, letting the sound of the wind through the dry grass act as a white noise machine. It's a soothing, rhythmic hiss that masks the distant, heavy footsteps of the larger animals moving toward their nightly resting grounds. As you drift in and out of a light doze, you realize that the Morrison isn't just a graveyard of bones. It's a living, breathing community. From the 50-ton Brachiosaurus to the half-ounce mammal at your feet, every creature has a role to play in this grand, dusty theatre. The Dryosaurus are the dancers, moving through the gaps left by the giants, reminding you that there is more to the Jurassic than just sheer size. You stand up slowly, your joints stiff from the cooling air, and look toward the darkening horizon. The sky is beginning to fill with the first stars, and you know that as the land animals settle down, a different kind of patrol is taking over the heights. You turn your eyes upward, ready to leave the mud and scrub behind for a moment and look at the masters of the Jurassic air. As the terrestrial world of the Morrison settles into a dusky, violet-hued quiet, your attention is pulled from the scuttling mammals at your feet to the vast, unobstructed theatre of the Jurassic sky. The air here feels thinner, cooler, and hums with a different kind of energy. You lean back against a weathered sandstone pillar, tilting your head until the horizon disappears and you are staring straight into the prehistoric atmosphere. Above the swaying tops of the Araucaria trees, a shape detaches itself from the clouds. It isn't the heavy, flapping motion of a bird, but a silent, leather-winged glide that looks more like a kite caught in a thermal. This is Mesodactylus, a small but elegant pterosaur, and it is the master of a realm the dinosaurs can only watch from below. It is a mainstream historical fact that pterosaurs were not dinosaurs, but a distinct lineage of flying reptiles that evolved alongside them, filling nearly every aerial niche, from tiny insectivores to the giants of the later Cretaceous. You watch as the Mesodactylus banks sharply, its wingspan of perhaps 4 feet catching the last of the golden light. Unlike the feathered wings you're used to, these are membranes of skin and muscle stretched tight over a ridiculously elongated 4th finger. You can see the translucency of the wing veins as it passes overhead, a living stained glass window of amber and grey. It doesn't seem to be hunting, it's simply riding the rising heat from the sun-baked canyon walls, a prehistoric hang glider enjoying the evening breeze. Historians still argue whether these Jurassic flyers were clumsy gliders that needed to leap from cliffs to achieve flight, or if they were sophisticated, powered flyers, capable of launching from flat ground using a quadrupedal vault. Watching the Mesodactylus now, the argument feels settled. It executes a mid-air barrel roll to snag a giant dragonfly with a precision that would make a falcon jealous. It's an aerial acrobat, its body covered in a fine hair-like fuzz called pycnofibers that suggests a high metabolism and a warm-blooded heart. This isn't a cold, mechanical reptile. It's a shivering, high-performance engine of the clouds. You find yourself yawning, the sight of the effortless gliding making your own gravity-bound limbs feel even heavier. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit for your sleepy brain. Some paleontologists have looked at the brain casts of pterosaurs and found that the areas dedicated to balance and coordination were massive, even compared to modern birds. There's a fringe theory that their wings were so sensitive they could feel the air pressure changing through their skin, allowing them to adjust their flight path before they even consciously realized they were hitting turbulence. Imagine having a nervous system that extends all the way to the tips of your fingers, turning your entire body into a sensory organ for the wind. It makes your own sense of touch feel a bit dull and unrefined by comparison. The sky is darkening now, turning a deep, velvety indigo. You notice more shapes appearing, smaller pterosaurs like Cephalodactylus darting between the trees like oversized bats. The sound they make is a dry, parchment-like rustle, a far cry from the melodic songs of the birds that will one day replace them. There's something eerie about a silent sky, a world where the only music is the snapping of insect wings and the occasional sharp squawk of a territorial dispute. You watch a pair of pterosaurs chase each other in a complex dance of shadows, their silhouettes crisp against the rising moon. The moon, by the way, looks significantly larger than you remember. 150 million years ago, it was physically closer to the Earth, casting a bright, silver light that turns the Morrison landscape into a surreal, monochrome dreamscape. You find yourself wondering if these creatures ever look down at the Allosaurus or the Brachiosaurus with a sense of pity. From up there, the kings of the Jurassic must look like slow, bipedal boulders, trapped in the mud and the ferns while the sky remains open and infinite. You close your eyes, letting the sound of the wind through the sandstone crags lull you. The Jurassic isn't just a place of teeth and claws, it's a place of perspective. Up there, in the thin air, the bone wars and the migrations of the herds don't matter. There is only the lift, the glide, and the stars. The air is getting properly cold now, the kind of chill that sinks into your bones. You wrap your jacket tighter around you, watching a Mesodactylus finally fold its wings and land on a high ledge, tucking its head under a wing membrane like a leather-bound book. The patrol is over for the day shifters, but you know the night flyers will soon be out. The Jurassic never truly sleeps, it just changes its cast of characters. You feel a deep sense of peace watching the sky go still, the vastness of the cosmos reflected in the prehistoric silence. As you prepare to leave your sandstone perch, you look one last time at the horizon. The mountains to the west are jagged silhouettes against the starlight, reminders of the tectonic forces that are slowly, invisibly reshaping the world, even as you watch. The sky is the only constant, a blue-black ceiling that has seen the rise and fall of 1,000 empires. You stand up, your boots crunching on the loose shale, and prepare to head back down toward the river basins. The sky belongs to the pterosaurs, but the story of the Morrison is written in the stone and the water below, in the floods that preserve what the wind would otherwise blow away. The cool, thin air of the pterosaur's ridge begins to thicken as you descend back toward the lowlands, where the smell of damp earth and mineral-rich silt grows heavy once again. You are walking along the edge of a wide, braided river system, but the water here isn't the lazy, tea-coloured stream you encountered with the Ceratosaurus. The sky to the west is a bruised, angry purple, and the air carries the electric charge of a distant mountain storm. You notice that the river is rising, its banks beginning to crumble under the pressure of a sudden upstream deluge. This is the raw power of the Morrison Formation's seasonal cycle, the rivers of stone that turn a vibrant ecosystem into a sprawling, muddy tomb in a matter of hours. You find yourself standing on a gravel bar, watching as the first wave of a flash flood carries tangled mats of cycads and drowned lungfish past your feet. It is a mainstream historical fact that many of the most famous dinosaur graveyards in the American West, such as the Carnegie Quarry at Dinosaur National Monument, were formed by these massive fluvial events. The rivers didn't just provide life, they acted as a high-speed burial service. You watch as a bloated carcass of a Camarasaurus, already stripped of its dignity by scavengers, is caught in the current and shoved into a bend in the river. Over the next few days, layers of sand and volcanic ash will settle over it, sealing it away from the air and the teeth of the Allosaurus. It's a grim, mechanical sort of immortality. You realize that for every dinosaur you've seen walking, there are 1,000 more beneath your boots, stacked like cordwood in the ancient sandstone. Historians still argue whether these massive accumulations of bones represent drought-breaking floods, where animals weakened by thirst were caught by sudden rains, or if they were simply the result of log jams in the river where carcasses naturally gathered over decades. Watching the water churn, you can see how easily it happens. A young Stegosaurus tries to cross the rising water 50 yards upstream. Its heavy, low-slung body is poorly suited for the current, and it struggles against the silt-laden flow. It makes it to the other side, shivering and coated in red mud. But you can't help but think about the ones that weren't so lucky. The Jurassic doesn't have a rescue service, it only has the relentless, grinding physics of water and gravity. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit for your weary mind to ponder. Some paleontologists have noted that certain bone beds are so densely packed and well preserved that they might have been caused by lahars, mud flows triggered by volcanic eruptions in the budding Sierra Nevada mountains to the west. Imagine a wall of grey, cement-like ash and water travelling at 40 miles per hour, entombing entire herds in an upright, walking position. It's a Pompeii of the plains scenario that makes the gentle river burial theory look like a spa treatment. You look at the distant, flickering lightning over the peaks and wonder if the ground beneath you is about to become a liquid. You find a higher ledge, a shelf of hard caliche that offers a safe view of the chaos. The sound is a constant, low-frequency roar, a subterranean growl that makes your teeth ache. You see a raft of vegetation floating by, and perched on top of it is a very confused-looking lizard, clinging to a fern frond for dear life. It's a reminder that in the Jurassic, even the small things have to be lucky to survive the night. You find yourself thinking back to that crocodile dung sunscreen. It would be useless against 1,000 tons of moving mud, but perhaps the scent would help the local spirits recognize you as something that belongs to the earth. You smile at the thought, though the humour feels a bit thin against the scale of the flood. The water begins to recede as quickly as it rose, leaving behind a landscape transformed. The gravel bar where you stood is gone, replaced by a thick, glistening layer of grey-green silt that smells of sulphur and old wood. You can see the tips of branches and the occasional curve of a rib poking out of the fresh mud. In a few million years, this will be the paid dirt for a team of sweating paleontologists in flannel shirts. But right now, it's just a mess. You watch as a pair of small, opportunistic pterosaurs land on the fresh mud, pecking at the stranded fish and invertebrates. Life returns to the disaster zone before the water has even finished draining. You find yourself getting sleepy again, the rhythmic sound of the receding water acting like a heavy, wet blanket on your senses. The Jurassic is a cycle of destruction and preservation, a world that is constantly erasing and rewriting itself. You lean your head against the cool stone of your ledge, watching the moon reflect in the new temporary ponds. The air is cooling rapidly, the moisture from the flood turning into a low-lying mist that hugs the ground. You feel like you're looking at a world made of glass and silver, fragile and beautiful, despite the violence that just occurred. As you prepare to move on, you realize that the rivers of stone are the reason you know anything about this place at all. Without the floods, the Diplodocus and the Allosaurus would have simply vanished into the wind, their atoms scattered to the four corners of the globe. The mud is a guardian, a heavy, silent witness that holds the secrets of the Morrison until the sun and the wind of a future age can strip the layers back. You stand up, your boots heavy with the fresh silt, and turn your back on the river. You've seen how they died. Now you want to see how the survivors handle the murky, ancient waters that remain. As the floodwaters of the Morrison recede, they leave behind a world of stagnant pools, oxbow lakes, and treacherous, shimmering mudflats. You step off your caliche ledge, your boots sinking into a silty slurry that feels like walking through wet velvet. The air here is different from the open scrub. It is heavy, cloying, and smells of anaerobic decay and ancient standing water. You are entering the realm of the Jurassic wetlands, a place where the line between the land and the water is blurred by thickets of horsetails that stand as tall as a man. In the center of a wide, murky lagoon, a series of low, ridged bumps breaks the surface. At first glance, they look like floating logs, until one of them blinks. This is Goniopholis, a broad-headed meso-eucrocodilian that would look startlingly familiar to any modern traveller. It is a mainstream historical fact that while dinosaurs dominated the terrestrial landscape, the freshwater ecosystems of the late Jurassic were ruled by crocodilians and their kin, many of which have changed remarkably little in 150 million years. You watch as a 10-foot Goniopholis slides silently from a mud bank into the tea-coloured water, barely leaving a ripple. It is a master of patience, a living fossil even in its own time. These animals survived the same floods that drowned the Apatosaurus, tucked away in the deep channels where the current couldn't reach them. You find a relatively dry hummock of earth to sit on, watching the bubbles rise from the bottom of the lagoon. It's a reminder that while the giants like Brachiosaurus are the celebrities of this era, the boring designs, the turtles, the fish, and the crocodiles are the ones that truly have the staying power to outlast empires. Historians still argue whether these Jurassic crocodilians were strictly aquatic hunters or if they were opportunistic generalists that frequently ventured onto land to snatch small dinosaurs like Dryosaurus. Looking at the powerful, muscular tail and the sprawling but sturdy limbs of the Goniopholis, you suspect the answer is a terrifying both. It's a predator that plays the long game, waiting for the thirst of the land dwellers to overcome their caution. You find yourself pulling your feet a bit further back from the water's edge, remembering that crocodile dung sunscreen again, in this particular corner of the Morrison, smelling like the local apex predator, might be the only thing that keeps you from becoming a mid-afternoon snack. It's a pungent thought, but one that carries a certain survivalist logic in the humid heat of the swamp. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit for your wandering mind. Some paleontologists have found fossilized gastroliths inside the rib cages of these ancient crocodiles, suggesting they swallowed stones not just for digestion but as ballast to help them sit more heavily on the riverbed. Imagine a creature so perfectly tuned to its environment that it uses rocks as a biological diving belt. It's a level of mechanical simplicity that makes the complex, hollow-boned skeletons of the pterosaurs seem almost fragile. You watch a large turtle, a glyptops, paddle lazily past a stand of reeds. Its shell is heavy and ornate, a mobile fortress in a world of teeth. It hasn't changed its business model in millions of years, and looking at the Allosaurus tracks in the mud nearby, you can see why. The humidity in the marshland acts as a natural sound dampener. The distant bellows of the sauropods are muffled here, replaced by the rhythmic glub-glub of swamp gas escaping the muck and the high-pitched buzz of giant water bugs. You find yourself falling into a deep, meditative state, lulled by the stillness of the water. The Jurassic isn't always a place of thundering footfalls. Sometimes it's just a quiet afternoon in a swamp, watching the algae grow on a crocodile's back. You notice a dragonfly with a wingspan the size of a dinner plate land on a horsetail near your hand. Its eyes are vast, multifaceted orbs that reflect the prehistoric sun in 1,000 tiny points of light. It's a jewel-toned survivor in a world of mud and scales. You realize that these wetlands are the nurseries of the Morrison. In the tangled roots and shallow pools, the next generation of life is hiding. You see tiny, lizard-like shapes darting through the shallows, larval amphibians and juvenile reptiles that won't be giant for a long time. This is where the energy of the ecosystem is recycled, where the nutrients from the upland floods are turned into new life. It's a messy, smelly, and incredibly productive factory of biology. You take a deep breath, the air tasting of damp moss and old rain, and feel the weight of the ages settling into your bones. The marsh doesn't care about the bone wars or the lion of the Jurassic. It only cares about the cycle of the water and the heat of the sun. As the afternoon light begins to slant through the horsetails, the Goniopholis re-emerges on the far bank, its scales glistening like wet slate. It opens its mouth in a wide gape, a move designed to shed excess heat, revealing a row of conical teeth that have seen plenty of action. It looks like a statue, a monument to the efficiency of the reptilian form. You stand up slowly, your clothes damp from the marsh air, and prepare to leave the murky shadows of the lagoon. You've seen the aquatic neighbours and their timeless resilience, and now you find yourself wondering about the things you can't see, the colours and patterns that these creatures wore when they were more than just shadows in the mud. The sun is a low orange orb reflected in the still water of the lagoon, creating a double horizon that makes the world feel twice as large. You turn away from the water, heading back toward the firmer ground of the floodplains. The marsh is a place of secrets, held tight by the mud and the reeds. But as the light changes, you realize that the biggest secret of all might be the very skin of the animals you've been tracking. You walk toward the lengthening shadows of a ginkgo grove, your mind turning toward the hidden palette of the Jurassic, the vibrant paint that once covered these magnificent prehistoric canvases. Leaving the monochromatic mud of the wetlands behind, you find yourself wandering into a grove of ginkgo trees where the light filters through the fan-shaped leaves in a shimmering golden-green mosaic. You stop to rest against a fallen trunk. But as you look at the dinosaurs moving in the distance, a small group of ornitholestes darting through the ferns, you realize your mental image of them is failing. For over a century, the public has seen these animals as shrink-wrapped skeletons covered in drab elephantine grey or muddy swamp-green skin. But as you watch a male ornitholestes pause to preen a row of stiff, primitive feathers along its forearms, you see a flash of iridescent blue, like the throat of a mountain bluebird catching the Jurassic sun. This is the new frontier of our understanding, the hunt for the actual paint of the Mesozoic. It is a mainstream historical fact that in recent decades the study of melanosomes, tiny, pigment-carrying organelles preserved in exceptionally rare fossils, has allowed scientists to begin mapping the true colours of certain dinosaurs. While we haven't yet colour-coded every resident of the Morrison, we know that many small theropods and early birds possessed complex patterns, from russet reds and stark blacks to shimmering metallic hues. You watch the ornitholestes hop onto a mossy rock, its tail twitching with a nervous avian energy. It isn't a scaly monster, it's a vibrant, feathered athlete. You find yourself squinting at the larger sauropods on the horizon, wondering if they too carried patterns we've never dared to imagine. Perhaps the dappled spots of a fawn or the bold, disruptive stripes of an okapi, to help them vanish into the shifting shadows of the conifer forests. Historians still argue whether the larger, multi-ton giants like Brachiosaurus were capable of maintaining vibrant skin patterns, or if the sheer physics of their size and the need for heat regulation dictated a more utilitarian, leathery hide. Some suggest that while the adults might have been drab to better radiate heat, the juveniles could have been as brightly coloured as tropical lizards, allowing them to hide more effectively in the sun-drenched understory. You watch a young Camarasaurus walk past, and for a split second you think you see a faint, honeycomb pattern of pale ochre along its neck. It's a tantalizing thought, a world that isn't just big but spectacularly beautiful, a prehistoric, technicolor dream that we are only just beginning to decode from the grey dust of the earth. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit for your sleepy brain. Some researchers have proposed that certain dinosaurs might have been capable of active camouflage, much like a modern cuttlefish or chameleon. While there's no direct fossil evidence for chromatophores yet, the idea of a 30-foot Allosaurus shifting its skin tone from fern green to bark brown as it stalks through the shadows is the kind of high-octane nightmare fuel that makes the Lion of the Jurassic even more impressive. You find yourself staring intently at a nearby thicket, half expecting the air itself to ripple and reveal a hidden predator. It's probably just the heat haze, but in the Morrison, your imagination tends to run as wild as the wildlife. You lean back, the sun warming your face through the ginkgo canopy. The crocodile dung sunscreen of the Bone Wars explorers seems like a particularly bad idea now. In a world this vibrant, why would you want to smell like a swamp when you could appreciate the scent of crushed pine and the visual feast of the forest? You notice a small lizard, a true lizard, not a dinosaur, scurry across your boot. It is a brilliant emerald green with a throat fan that it flashes in a quick, rhythmic display. It's a reminder that nature has always loved a bit of flair. The Jurassic wasn't a funeral procession of grey giants. It was a riotous, noisy, and colourful explosion of life. You find your eyelids growing heavy, the golden light and the soft rustle of the leaves creating a perfect, natural lullaby. The hunt for colour is more than just an artistic exercise. It tells us about how these animals lived. If an Allosaurus had a bright red crest, it was a social creature that cared about status. If a Dryosaurus had a striped tail, it was an animal that used visual white noise to confuse its hunters. You realize that by finding the colour, we are finding the soul of the Jurassic. You look at the Ornitholestes one last time before it vanishes into the brush. It's a tiny blue spark in a vast green world, a living testament to the complexity of a past we are still learning to see clearly. You close your eyes for a moment, letting your mind fill in the blanks, painting the horizon in shades of terracotta, teal, and gold. The air is cooling as the sun begins its final descent, and the golden hues of the ginkgo grove turn to a deep, royal amber. You feel a sense of profound privilege. You aren't just seeing the bones, you're seeing the real Jurassic, a world that was as vivid and immediate as our own. The secrets of the dinosaurs aren't just about how big they were or how they died, they're about the flash of a feather in the sun and the hidden patterns in the shadows. You take a slow, deep breath, the scent of the forest filling your lungs, and feel the world shifting once again. The colours of the day are fading, and as the light dies, a new, more mysterious palette is about to take over. As you stand up to continue your journey, the forest feels different. The shadows are no longer just dark spots, they are invitations to wonder what might be hiding within them. You've seen the giants, the hunters, the scavengers, and the vibrant colours that once defined them. Now, you find yourself turning toward the east, where the sky is already a deep, bruised purple. The nightfall in the Morrison is approaching, and in the Jurassic, the darkness brings out a whole new set of rules and a whole new cast of characters. You walk softly, your footsteps muffled by the fallen ginkgo leaves, ready to see what the moonlight reveals. The golden glow of the ginkgo grove has bled into a deep, bruised violet, and the temperature drops with a sudden, bone-chilling clarity. You are standing on the edge of a sandstone plateau as the Jurassic night rushes in, a heavy velvet curtain pulled across the Morrison. The sky above is a sprawling, chaotic jewellery box of stars, far denser and more brilliant than anything you've seen in the modern world, dominated by a moon that looms nearly 10% larger and significantly brighter. In this silver-washed landscape, the familiar shapes of the day have transformed. The towering Brachiosaurus are now just shifting, mountain-like silhouettes against the Milky Way, their low-frequency rumbles sounding like the Earth itself is snoring. But as you adjust your eyes to the dark, you realize the Jurassic doesn't sleep. It simply changes its frequency. It is a mainstream historical fact that many dinosaurs likely possessed adaptations for cathemeral activity, meaning they were active in short bursts throughout both day and night rather than being strictly diurnal. You watch as a small predator, perhaps a Calurus, stalks through the moonlit ferns. Its eyes are disproportionately large, catching the lunar glare like two polished silver coins. It moves with a silent, ghostly precision that was missing in the heat of the afternoon. The night is the great equalizer in the Morrison. The crushing weight of the giants matters less when the world is reduced to what you can hear and smell within a 20-foot radius. You find yourself huddling against a sun-warmed rock, grateful for the lingering heat of the stone as the air begins to taste of frost and ancient, sleeping plants. Historians still argue whether the larger carnivores like Allosaurus were proficient night hunters or if they primarily used the darkness to rest and digest. Some evidence of large sclerotic rings, bony circles within the eye socket, suggests that certain Jurassic predators had the optical hardware to see perfectly well in the dim silver light of a Cretaceous moon. You freeze as a low, rasping breath sounds from a thicket of horsetails just 10 feet away. You can't see the owner, but you can feel the rhythmic pulse of its presence. Is it a hunter waiting for a stray Dryosaurus, or just a weary herbivore trying to survive until dawn? The ambiguity of the night is its most potent weapon. You find yourself reaching for that imaginary crocodile dung sunscreen again, wishing for anything that might mask the scent of a terrified mammal in the dark. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit to occupy your mind while you wait for the shadows to move. Some researchers have speculated that the large, hollow crests and nasal passages of certain dinosaurs might have been used to produce bioluminescent displays or even heat shimmer signals visible only to those with specialized vision. While highly speculative, the idea of a Jurassic night filled with glowing, pulsing colors, a prehistoric neon city of scales, is a beautiful alternative to the pitch-black void we usually imagine. You look at a nearby fern and see a cluster of primitive beetles glowing with a soft, greenish light, a tiny reminder that nature has always had a way to keep the lights on. You find your breathing slowing down, syncing with the deep, rhythmic sighs of the resting giants in the valley below. The night air is remarkably still, allowing sounds to travel for miles. You can hear the distant crystalline splash of a lungfish in the river and the dry, parchment-like rattle of a pterosaur adjusting its wings on a high cliff face. It's a symphony of the small and the hidden. You realize that the real Jurassic Americas isn't just about the spectacle of the hunt. It's about this quiet endurance, the millions of heartbeats ticking away under the stars, waiting for the sun to reset the clock. You pull your knees to your chest, the silence of the Morrison wrapping around you like a heavy, cool blanket. The stars seem to wheel overhead with a dizzying speed. Without the light pollution of a future civilization, the heavens feel dangerously close, as if you could reach out and pluck a constellation from the sky. You watch the Great Bear of the Jurassic. Different stars, different patterns, but the same infinite depth. This is the time when the small mammals, your direct ancestors, are most active, scurrying through the leaf litter to collect seeds and insects, while the terrible lizards are slowed by the chill. You feel a kinship with these tiny, furry shadows. They are the true masters of the night, the ones who will inherit the earth when the giants eventually stumble. You find yourself drifting towards sleep, the rhythmic hooting of a primitive owl-like creature in the distance acting as a hypnotic cue. The Jurassic night is peaceful, yet pregnant with a tension you can't quite shake. It's the feeling of being a small part of a very large, very old story that doesn't need you to be its protagonist. You close your eyes, letting the silver moonlight play across your eyelids, and for a moment, you are no longer a visitor. You are just another warm-blooded speck in a world of cold stone and ancient scales, dreaming of the dawn. As the first hint of grey begins to touch the eastern horizon, the nocturnal chorus starts to fade. The large eyes of the Coelurus vanish back into the brush, and the deep groans of the sauropods take on a more active, hungry tone. The night in the Morrison is a secret chapter, a time of shadows and whispers that the fossil record rarely captures. You stand up, your limbs stiff and shaking from the cold, and watch as the stars begin to blink out, one by one. The day is returning, but the world you are waking up to is not the one you left. The seasons are shifting, and the empire of the Jurassic is beginning its long, slow transition into something new. The biting chill of the Jurassic night begins to lift, but the dawn that greets you feels different from the vibrant mornings of the earlier Morrison. The air is thinner, carrying a dusting of volcanic ash that coats the ginkgo leaves in a fine grey powder. You are standing on a high ridge, looking out over a landscape that is beginning to show the strain of its own success. The wide braided rivers are shrinking into seasonal trickles, and the lush fern prairies are being encroached upon by tougher, woodier shrubs. This is the twilight of the Jurassic Empire, a slow-motion transition where the environmental conditions that favoured the 100-foot giants are beginning to unravel. You watch a herd of Apatosaurus moving with a weary, heavy-footed determination, their ribs showing slightly through their leathery hides as they search for a forest that hasn't already been stripped bare. It is a mainstream historical fact that the end of the Jurassic period was marked by a significant regression of the epicontinental seas and an increase in regional aridity across the American West. The Morrison Formation, once a paradise of floodplains, was gradually replaced by the more rugged, varied environments of the early Cretaceous. You notice that the iconic giants of your journey, the Diplodocus and the Stegosaurus, are becoming harder to find, replaced by smaller, more adaptable generalists. The empire isn't collapsing in a fiery apocalypse, it's being slowly choked by a changing climate and the shifting of tectonic plates far to the west. You find yourself sitting on a ledge of crumbling mudstone, watching the dust devils dance across a dry lakebed that only a few centuries ago was a thriving wetland. Historians still argue whether the extinction of the Morrison's megasauropods was caused by a sudden biological bottleneck or a more gradual replacement as new, more efficient herbivores like the early iguanodontians began to compete for the same resources. Watching the landscape now, it feels like a battle of attrition. The plants are changing, becoming more fibrous and less nutritious, forcing the giants to spend more energy just to stay alive. You see an Allosaurus, its once proud crests scarred and dull, scavenging the carcass of a juvenile sauropod that simply didn't have the strength to reach the next watering hole. It's a somber, quiet scene. A reminder that even the most successful lineages are ultimately at the mercy of the planet's shifting moods. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit for your sleepy brain. Some paleontologists have examined the microscopic growth rings in dinosaur bones and suggested that toward the end of the Jurassic, these animals were reaching sexual maturity much earlier than their ancestors. It's as if the species themselves knew the clock was ticking, racing to reproduce before the environment became too harsh to support them. Imagine a world of teenage giants, a society of massive hormonal adolescents trying to navigate a world that was literally drying up beneath their feet. It adds a layer of tragic urgency to the slow, rhythmic booming of their footsteps. You look at a young Camarasaurus nearby, its eyes wide and searching, and feel a pang of sympathy for a creature born into the autumn of its kind. The sun is a pale, filtered disk in the ash-streaked sky, casting long, pale shadows that lack the sharp edges of the previous days. The crocodile dung sunscreen you've joked about would be useless here. The real threat isn't the sun, but the dust in your lungs and the lack of green in the valley. You find yourself pulling your collar up against the grit-laden wind. The Morrison is a masterpiece of preservation, but it's also a record of loss. Every layer of stone you've walked over represents a moment where the world moved on and left something behind. You realize that you are witnessing the birth of the new Americas, a place that will eventually belong to the flowering plants and the more sophisticated hunters of the Cretaceous. You find a small, sheltered pocket in the rocks where a few resilient ferns are still clinging to life. You sit there for a long time, lulled by the dry, whistling sound of the wind through the dead horsetails. The Jurassic isn't going out with a bang, but with a long, slow sigh. It's a peaceful kind of decay, a graceful bowing out of the giants to make room for the next act. You find your eyes growing heavy, the repetitive, rhythmic swaying of the stressed trees acting like a metronome for the end of an era. You aren't afraid, you're just tired, feeling the weight of the millions of years that are pressing down on this landscape. As the afternoon fades into a dusty, red-gold evening, you realize that the echoes of these animals are already being written into the earth. The footprints they leave in the drying mud today will become the sandstone tracks of tomorrow. The bones of the Allosaurus you saw earlier will become the treasures of marsh and cope. Nothing is truly lost. It just changes state. You stand up, brushing the volcanic ash from your sleeves, and look toward the final horizon of your journey. The desert of the modern world is calling, the place where the ghosts of the Morrison finally come to rest in the sun-scorched canyons of the West. You take one last look at the hazy valley. A lone Brachiosaurus bellows in the distance, a deep, resonant sound that seems to vibrate the very air. It's a defiant, beautiful noise, a final salute to a world that was once theirs. You turn away and begin the long climb toward the top of the ridge, where the red rocks of Utah and Wyoming are waiting to show you the end of the story. The real Jurassic Americas are fading into the mist of time, but the secrets they left behind are etched into the very bones of the continent. The volcanic haze of the late Jurassic begins to thin, and the heavy, humid air of the floodplains is replaced by a sharp, dry wind that smells of sagebrush and sun-baked rock. You are standing on a high, wind-scoured mesa in modern-day Utah, looking out over the jagged labyrinth of the San Rafael Swell. The giant conifers and the endless fern prairies have vanished, replaced by a stark, beautiful desert of red sandstone and white caliche. Below you, the layers of the Morrison Formation are exposed like the pages of a giant, weathered book, tilted and broken by the tectonic upheaval of the intervening millions of years. This is the final stage of your journey, where the living, breathing, real Jurassic Americas become the silent, stone-cold echoes in the sandstone. You find yourself sitting on the edge of a canyon, your legs dangling over a drop that reveals 150 million years of compressed history in a single vertical stripe of color. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Morrison Formation is one of the most productive sources of dinosaur fossils in the world, stretching across 13 states from Canada to New Mexico. You look down at the rock beneath your hand and realize you are touching a pavement of fossilized dinosaur bone fragments, polished by the wind until they shine like desert varnish. It's a strange, disjointed feeling. An hour ago, you were dodging the thagomizer of a living stegosaurus, and now That same animal is a puzzle of mineralized silica and calcium scattered across 1,000 square miles of wilderness. The transition from biology to geology is complete. You find yourself tracing the outline of a fossilized ripple mark in the stone, a frozen memory of a Jurassic river that hasn't flowed since the continents were still huddled together. Historians still argue whether the golden age of dinosaur discovery in the American West is drawing to a close, or if the most significant finds are still buried beneath the inaccessible badlands of the high plains. With modern technology, like ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging, we are finding lost quarries that Marsh and Cope could only dream of. Yet the vastness of the Morrison ensures that millions of secrets remain locked away. Watching the sun hit the far wall of the canyon, you see the unmistakable curve of a sauropod limb bone protruding from a layer of green mudstone, high up on an unreachable cliff. It is a sentinel of the past, a ghost that refuses to be forgotten. You find yourself whispering a quiet hello to the stone, a greeting across a gulf of time that the human mind can barely comprehend. Here is a quirky, fringe tidbit for your final sleepy moments. Some local legends in the southwest speak of living stones, or dragon bones, that seem to shift position in the desert night. While scientists attribute this to the natural erosion of the soft mudstone around the harder fossils, there is a certain poetic beauty in the idea that these giants are still restless, trying to shake off the weight of the mountains that buried them. You look at a nearby rock that resembles a weathered vertebrae, and just for a second you imagine it twitching. It's the desert playing tricks on your tired eyes, or perhaps it's just the lingering magic of the Jurassic, refusing to let you go. The sun is setting now, but it isn't the ash-choked sun of the late Morrison. It's a brilliant, clear air sunset that turns the Utah desert into a sea of liquid fire. The shadows of the mesas stretch out for miles, mirroring the long necks of the Diplodocus you watched earlier. You realize that the real Jurassic never truly ended. It just changed its form. It lives on in the birds that flutter through the juniper bushes, in the crocodiles that still haunt the southern bayous, and in the very oil and gas that power the modern world. You are standing on the ruins of an empire, but it is an empire that provided the foundation for everything that came after. You feel a deep, grounding sense of belonging, a realization that your own brief life is a tiny, precious spark in a much larger, more ancient flame. The wind picks up, whistling through the cracks in the sandstone with that same eerie, flute-like sound you heard through the plates of the Stegosaurus. It is a soothing, lonely music that speaks of deep time and the infinite patience of the earth. You find yourself leaning back against the cool rock, your eyes closing as the first stars of the modern night begin to pierce the velvet sky. The journey is over, but the echoes remain. You can still feel the vibration of the sauropod's footfall in your heels, still smell the metallic tang of the Jurassic rain, and still see the glint of an Allosaurus eye in the shadows. The Morrison has shared its secrets with you, and now it is time to let them settle into your dreams. The wind down, as the desert air settles into a deep, hushed stillness, the sharp edges of the mesas begin to soften into the dark, and the world feels as though it is sighing along with you. Let your breath become slow and steady, matching the ancient rhythm of the turning earth. The weight of the sandstone and the vastness of the Jurassic sky are no longer a burden, but a warm, heavy blanket that pins you gently to the present moment. Imagine the red dust of the canyon floor rising in a slow, silent dance, swirling around you like a mist of powdered time, smoothing away the worries of the day. The giants are sleeping now, tucked safely beneath the protective layers of the earth, their long migrations ended, and their battles long since won. You are safe in the quiet of your own room, the soft hum of the world around you acting as a gentle anchor. The fierce hunters and the towering towers of bone have faded into soft, charcoal sketches at the edge of your mind, their power transformed into a peaceful, protective presence. Feel your muscles let go, starting from your toes and moving up through your tired limbs, until you are as still and unmoving as the ancient fossils in the stone. There is no more need for vigilance. The night belongs to the stars and the deep, restorative silence of the ages. The Jurassic is a dream you are now free to enter, a world of silver moonlight and whispering ferns, where you can drift endlessly without a care. Sleep now, knowing that the story of the Earth is a long and beautiful one, and you are a cherished part of its design. The ghosts of the Morrison are watching over you, and the desert wind is a lullaby.